And 5. 5 miles in the bag, bringing me up to 30 miles for the week. That's my goal. Let's go celebrate.
3.1 plus 6.2 plus 5 plus 10. Oh, that means another 10-mile run tomorrow to hit my target.
Yeah. No, well, I think I need to be up to about 50 a week before I start tapering, which should be okay if I do about 3 double days a week, maybe. Yeah.
Are you obsessed with your weekly mileage?
Do you need to know exactly how far you've gone each week?
Do you have a weekly goal of how many miles you need to run?
We're going to be answering the question of should you count your weekly mileage? Now, a lot of people would say, yes, of course, but is it as simple as that?
Stay tuned for an answer to the debate, but first off, it would really help us out if you hit subscribe and tap the bell icon so you get notified when we upload new videos all about running, which we do every week.
Now, let's talk numbers.
Whether you're recording on a watch, a phone, or just crunching the numbers on a piece of paper, most runners are aware of how many miles or kilometres they've run every week.
But why do we want to know this magic number? Well, let's start off by taking a look at some of the positives to counting your weekly mileage.
Firstly, it's great to know your weekly average because then if you're going into a training block or training for a race, you can use the 10% rule effectively. Now, most training plans will suggest that you increase your mileage by 10% and no more each week. That way you reduce the risk of injury and of loading up too quickly.
Counting the miles also gives you a sense of personal achievement every week. You've got physical evidence of how far you've gone, and you can use that number to work out your progress.
You can also use this number to compare notes with other runners. Now, I know that comparison is the thief of joy. However, we know lots of runners do like to swap notes and see what each other is doing, especially if you're training for the same event and you're roughly around the same ability. In fact, we've got a whole video jam-packed full of stats about how far people run to train for the average marathon times. So be sure to check that out if it's something you're interested in.
So those are the positives, but what does the number actually mean and how valuable is it? A recent discussion in the Journal of Orthopedic and Sports Physical Therapy discusses how simply analysing and counting mileage risks missing out some more important analysis when looking at your training.
It might sound obvious, but tracking only your distance doesn't take into account the intensity in which you're running at, and tracking both the duration and intensity, that works out how much stress you're putting on your body.
We need to think about how to monitor this stress level in order to balance getting over fatigued, but also doing enough training that you will see an improvement through that training load. And also think about the potentials of injury risks too.
This training stress is cumulative too. The stress from your previous day or previous week's runs all has an impact on the training effect of your next run. So running 10 miles on tired legs is obviously going to take more of a toll than running 10 miles on fresh legs.
So let's look at how you can measure this training stress in a different way to counting up your weekly mileage so that you can get the right balance between not being over fatigued but getting enough training stimulus to get faster.
There's something called training impulse, which is a way of combining the intensity of the effort with the duration to give you an overall measure of the impact of that training.
To use this, you would simply record your average perceived effort during a run on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the easiest, 10 being the hardest, and then simply multiply that by the number of minutes.
So to make this clearer, think about assigning your easy runs a 3, your long runs a 4 or 5, then tempo or threshold 7 and hard intervals 8. So for example, if you went out and did a 60-minute easy run, then the overall score for that run would be 180.
Now, this number on its own might not seem very useful, but if you work backwards over recent weeks or used it going forwards, you might be able to spot if one individual week showed a huge leap.
It would also help to make sure that if you have any kind of periodization in your training, for example, if you run 3 weeks hard with a 4th week a little easier, that 4th week, that recovery week, really would be less stressful on your body, because that's where a lot of adaptations happen.
To illustrate this, let's take a look at a hypothetical hard week and easy week of training. Now, in both weeks, you're running 5 times a week, and the mileage itself is pretty similar. There's only a 3-mile drop in the easy week, but taking into account those scores for intensity for training load, the stress score is 25% lower in the easy week compared to the harder week.
It's worth noting that a lot of newer running watches will work out your training load for you by looking at your heart rate data, your time of training, and a clever algorithm based on something called your excess post-exercise oxygen consumption, or EPOC, which gives you an assessment of your training load, and some will even suggest recovery times as well.
So we've discussed balancing fatigue with training, but you also need to think about how different types of training at different intensities, different types of training load might also affect your risk of injury.
The authors of the article that we mentioned earlier on looked at 3 runs that all involved 10 kilometres of running. So the first was running on trails in cushioned shoes on fresh legs. The second run was the same but on fatigued legs. And the third was 1K intervals times 10 on a track in spikes.
The different paces and different efforts involved meant differences in total time, total steps, cadence, ground reaction force, and peak Achilles tendon force.
So runners did significantly more steps and spent more time on their feet during the tired easy run. But while they did significantly fewer steps during the interval training, they had a higher cadence, a higher ground reaction force, and a higher Achilles tendon force.
Higher forces could be associated with greater injury risk, but it's also possible that a greater number of steps and spending time in a fatigued state could also cause trouble when it comes to compromising your body mechanics, therefore exaggerating any existing inefficiencies.
So while we talked about the potential of quantifying the physiological stress manually or through technology, it's not clear how we do that with injury risk. Smart insoles and other tech does exist, but it's also smart to think about what shoes you're wearing, what surface you're running on, and also giving your body a chance to survive and adapt. Training stress can also be influenced by a lot of other internal and external factors, and this is really important to remember when planning your training.
You could run the same mileage week after week, but so many different factors can have an impact on the quality of your training. For example, the routes that you're running, whether they're hilly or flat, the temperatures that you're running in, work and life stresses, sleep quality and diet can all have an impact on your training.
And these factors should well be taken into account when using the perceived exertion method of measuring your training, and not getting stuck on how a particular run should feel. After all, from week to week, the same run could feel like a 7 out of 10 sort of okay run. The next week, it could feel like a 9 out of 10 lung-busting, horrific workout.
So have a look at how you structure your training week and be flexible depending on what life throws at you. Give yourself the best chance to adapt to the training that you're doing and recover from it too.
So, the answer to the big question, should you count your mileage?
Well, it's a bit of a yes and no answer. Mileage is a really useful figure for you to be able to see how your training is going week on week, but not all miles are the same, and so it can be slightly misleading in tracking your progress.
For example, if you're running 30 easy miles a week, your physical fitness is going to be different to someone who's running 20 miles a week, but with interval sessions, tempo runs, and hill sprints. So bear that in mind when thinking about your mileage. It's a great tool, but it doesn't tell you everything.
So remember, next time you look at your watch or tally up your miles, it won't tell you everything. You might need to dig a little deeper, or even step back a bit and take a longer look over the last few weeks or even months.
How much attention do you pay to your weekly mileage? Let us know in the comments below, and we'll see you next time on the Running Channel.